My kid were hungry.
The woman collapsed to her knees right there in the middle of the courtroom, clutching $300 in cash that Judge Frank Caprio had just handed her, sobbing so hard her entire body shook. Her two small children ran to her, wrapping their tiny arms around their mother as she wept, and I watched the toughest bailiff I've ever known turn away to wipe tears from his eyes. I'm Adam Broderick, court reporter for the Providence Journal, and what I witnessed that day wasn't just a court case. It was the moment I saw justice become mercy, and mercy become love. Let me take you back to how we got to that moment, because this story, this beautiful, heartbreaking story, needs to be told from the very beginning. It was a Tuesday morning in March, and the Providence Municipal Court was running through its usual docket. I'd been covering Judge Caprio's courtroom for 5 years, and I thought I'd seen everything. Traffic violations, unpaid tickets, minor disputes, cases that blended together into a forgettable routine. I was on my third cup of coffee, barely paying attention as I waited for something interesting to happen. Then Maria Santos walked through those courtroom doors. I'll never forget the look on her face. It wasn't defiance or anger or the blank indifference I'd seen on so many defendants. It was pure, crushing defeat. Her eyes were red and swollen like she'd been crying for hours, maybe days. Her hands trembled as she clutched a worn purse to her chest, and when she took her place at the defendant's table, I saw her glance back toward the gallery. That's when I noticed them, two small children sitting in the back row. A little girl with pigtails, maybe 7 years old, holding the hand of a younger boy who couldn't have been more than 4. The boy was holding a stuffed bear that had clearly seen better days. And the girl, God, the girl had the saddest, most serious expression I'd ever seen on a child's face, like she understood exactly what was happening and was trying to be brave for her mother. Judge Caprio entered, and we all rose. At 87 years old, Frank Caprio had become a legend in Providence. Over 40 years on the bench, and he still treated every person who stood before him with dignity and respect. His white hair was combed neatly, his dark suit impeccable. But it was his eyes that always struck me. Warm, understanding eyes that had seen decades of human struggle and never stopped caring. Case number 2024-3847, State of Rhode Island versus Maria Santos, the clerk announced. Retail theft. Maria approached the bench on unsteady legs, and I could see her trying to compose herself, trying to hold back the tears that were already pooling in her eyes. Miss Santos, Judge Caprio said gently, looking over his reading glasses, you're charged with retail theft from the Price Right supermarket. How do you plead? Her voice was so quiet we could barely hear it. Guilty, Your Honor. There was something in the way she said it. No excuses, no justification, just a broken admission that made my chest tighten. Can you speak up, please? Judge Caprio asked, still gentle. Guilty, Your Honor. This time her voice cracked, and I saw her shoulders start to shake. The prosecutor, a young woman named Jennifer Walsh, stood to present the case. Your Honor, on March 15th, the defendant was observed by store security placing items into her personal bag and attempting to leave without paying. The total value was $47.32. Items included bread, peanut butter, milk, eggs, and children's cereal. I stopped writing. Food. She stole food. Judge Caprio's expression shifted. He leaned forward slightly, studying the file in front of him, then looked up at Maria Santos. Miss Santos, why didn't you pay for these items? That's when it happened. Maria tried to answer, tried to speak, but the words caught in her throat. Her face crumpled, and tears started streaming down her cheeks. She looked back at her children, and the little girl gave her a brave smile that just shattered my heart into pieces. I didn't have any money, Your Honor, Maria finally managed to say through her tears. I didn't have $47. I didn't have 47 cents. The courtroom went completely silent. You could hear the clock ticking on the wall, the soft hum of the fluorescent lights. Everyone was frozen, watching this woman break down. "Tell me about your situation," Judge Caprio said softly. "Are you working?" Maria nodded, wiping her eyes with shaking hands. "Yes, Your Honor. I work 2 jobs. I clean offices at night downtown, and during the day I work at a laundromat. But my husband," her voice broke again. "He left us 6 months ago, just disappeared. And I've been trying to keep up with everything but the rent, and my daughter needs an inhaler for her asthma that costs $85 a month, and I was trying to make it to my next paycheck, but..." She couldn't continue. The sobs took over, her whole body shaking with the force of them. "But your children needed to eat," Judge Caprio finished for her. Maria nodded, unable to speak, tears dripping onto her faded sweater. How long had it been since they had a proper meal? 3 days, Your Honor." The words came out as a whisper. 3 days. They were so hungry. My son kept asking me for food, and I didn't have anything to give him. Nothing. I watched them go to bed hungry, and I couldn't do it anymore. I just couldn't. She was crying so hard now that she could barely stand. She gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white, her whole body trembling. Behind her, I saw the little girl, Sophia, pull her brother closer, and both children were crying now too, silent tears running down their small faces. I looked around the courtroom. The court reporter had stopped typing, her hand over her mouth. The bailiff who'd worked this courtroom for 20 years was staring at the floor, his jaw clenched tight. Even Prosecutor Walsh looked shaken, her professional demeanor cracking. Judge Caprio removed his glasses and set them on the bench. For a long moment, he just sat there, looking at this devastated woman and her hungry children. Then he did something I'd never seen him do in all my years covering his courtroom. He stood up and stepped down from the bench. "Your Honor?" The bailiff looked alarmed. But Judge Caprio walked right past him, walked across the courtroom floor, and stood directly in front of Maria Santos. This 87-year-old judge in his black robe, standing face to face with a woman who had stolen bread to feed her babies. "Ms. Santos," he said, and his voice was thick with emotion. "Look at me." She raised her tear-stained face to meet his eyes. "You're a good mother," he said firmly. "Do you understand me? A good mother who was put in an impossible position." Maria shook her head, crying harder. "No, Your Honor, I'm not. I'm a thief. I broke the law. You fed your hungry children," Judge Caprio interrupted, and I saw his own eyes glistening with tears now. "That's what you did. You're standing here because you love your children more than you love your own freedom, your own dignity. You risked everything to make sure they didn't go hungry another night." He turned back toward the bench, and when he spoke again, his voice rang out clear and strong through the courtroom. "Mrs. Santos, I find you guilty of retail theft as charged. However, I am suspending all jail time and all fines." Relief flooded Maria's face, but her legs buckled, and the bailiff rushed forward to steady her. "Furthermore," Judge Caprio continued, pulling out his wallet, "I am personally paying the $47.32 to the store for the items you took." Gasps echoed through the courtroom. Prosecutor Walsh's mouth fell open. "Your Honor, I don't think..." But Judge Caprio wasn't finished. He pulled out a stack of bills from his wallet and handed them to the bailiff. "That's $300. Miss Santos, approach the bench." Maria walked forward, still crying, still shaking, barely able to see through her tears. The bailiff placed the money in her hands, and she stared at it like she was hallucinating. "Your Honor, I can't take this," she sobbed. "Yes, you can, and you will," Judge Caprio said firmly, and now there were tears running down his weathered face too. "You're going to take your children to the grocery store today, not Price Right, somewhere else, and you're going to buy them a real meal. You're going to fill your cart with food, and whatever's left, you put toward your daughter's medicine." "Your Honor, please, I don't deserve..." Maria could barely get the words out. Those children deserve to eat. Judge Caprio's voice cracked with emotion. They deserve a mother who isn't punished for loving them. And you, Miss Santos, you deserve help, not judgment, not punishment. Help. That's when it happened. Maria's knees gave out completely, and she collapsed right there on the courtroom floor, clutching that money to her chest, sobbing uncontrollably. The sound that came from her wasn't just crying, it was years of struggle, of fear, of desperation, all pouring out at once. And then little Sophia broke free from the gallery and ran to her mother, her small shoes echoing in the silent courtroom. She threw herself onto Maria, wrapping her thin arms around her mother's neck. "Mama, Mama, don't cry," she kept saying, but the little girl was crying too. And then Miguel ran forward, still holding his stuffed bear, and he climbed into his mother's lap, and all three of them sat there on the courtroom floor, holding each other and weeping. I wasn't taking notes anymore. I couldn't. My vision was blurred with tears. Looking around, I saw I wasn't alone. The court reporter was openly crying. The bailiff had turned completely away, his shoulders shaking. People in the gallery were wiping their eyes. Even Prosecutor Walsh was crying, her file folder forgotten in her hands. Judge Caprio walked over to where they sat and knelt down beside them. This elderly judge in his robe, kneeling on the courtroom floor. He placed his hand gently on Sophia's head. "You're a very brave girl," he said softly. "And you, young man," he said to Miguel, "you take care of your mama and your sister, okay?" Miguel nodded, hugging his bear tighter. Judge Caprio helped Maria to her feet, steadying her with both hands. "Before you leave today, you're going to meet with our family services coordinator. She's going to help you apply for food assistance, for help with rent, for programs to help with your daughter's medical costs. You're not going to face this alone anymore. Do you understand?" Maria nodded, unable to speak, clutching her children and the money like lifelines. "And Ms. Santos," Judge Caprio added, his voice breaking, "if you ever find yourself in this position again, if you ever feel that desperate, you don't steal. You call this courthouse. You ask for me, you call, and we will help you. There are always other options. Always." "Thank you," Maria finally managed to whisper. "Thank you, Your Honor. God bless you. Thank you." The three of them walked toward the back of the courtroom, holding on to each other. Sophia looked back once, and through her tears, she mouthed the words, "Thank you," to Judge Caprio. After they left, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Judge Caprio stood there for a moment, then slowly walked back to the bench. He sat down heavily, suddenly looking every one of his 87 years, and buried his face in his hands. When he finally looked up, his eyes were red, his face wet with tears. 23 years ago, he said quietly, and everyone leaned forward to hear. My own mother stood in a welfare line to get food for our family. My father worked 2 jobs, just like Miss Santos. They were good people who hit hard times. Nobody helped them. Nobody showed mercy. His voice was shaking now. So when I see a mother stealing bread for her children, I don't just see a defendant. I see my own mother. I see every parent who's ever had to make an impossible choice. And I think not this time. This time, someone's going to help. He paused, wiping his eyes. The law says Ms. Santos committed a crime, and she did. But the real crime is a system that lets a woman work 2 jobs and still can't feed her children. That's what we should all be ashamed of. Prosecutor Walsh spoke up, her voice thick with emotion. Your Honor, that was... You didn't have to do that. Judge Caprio looked at her with tired, tear-stained eyes. Ms. Walsh, if we lose our humanity in the pursuit of perfect justice, then we've lost everything that matters. I'd rather break every rule in the book than send a mother to jail for feeding her babies. He banged the gavel softly. Next case. But the courtroom felt different. Sacred somehow. Like we'd all witnessed something profound. Something that reminded us why justice and mercy need each other. I sat there for a long time after, unable to move. My notes were a mess. My eyes were swollen, and my heart felt like it had been broken open and put back together differently. That afternoon, I learned that Maria had spent hours with the family services coordinator. She'd qualified for food assistance immediately. She'd been connected with a program that would cover her daughter's asthma medication completely. A legal aid attorney was going to help her track down her ex-husband for child support, and a local church had offered to help with her rent for the next 3 months. One act of mercy had set off a chain reaction of compassion. The story I wrote ran the next day, and within hours it had spread across the country. My phone wouldn't stop ringing. The story was shared millions of times. People sent donations to the courthouse for Maria. Others sent money for Judge Caprio to use for future cases. The outpouring was overwhelming, but the most important response came 3 weeks later in a letter delivered to my desk at the Providence Journal. "Dear Mr. Broderick," it began, in careful handwriting. "This is Sofia Santos. My mama is helping me write this letter. I wanted to tell you about Judge Caprio. He saved us. My mama cries less now. Miguel and me get to eat every day. Mama says Judge Caprio is an angel. I think so too. Please tell him thank you from us. And tell people that there are still good people in the world. Love, Sophia. P.S. Miguel says thank you too." I keep that letter on my desk. On days when the world feels cruel and hopeless, I read it and remember that Tuesday morning in March when an elderly judge showed us all what justice with a heart looks like. Judge Frank Caprio retired 6 months later. At his retirement party, someone asked what case stood out most in his 43 years on the bench. "Maria Santos," he said immediately, his voice still thick with emotion at the memory. "That case reminded me that before we're judges or lawyers or police officers, we're human beings, and our first duty is to each other." He paused, his eyes glistening. "I've sent people to jail. I've enforced the law. But that day, I looked at a mother and her hungry children, and I thought, what does justice really mean if it crushes the people who need help the most? So I chose mercy, and I'd make the same choice again." The last I heard, Maria Santos is thriving. She got a better-paying job. Sophia's asthma is under control. Miguel started school. They're making it day by day because one judge saw their humanity and chose compassion over punishment. And in Providence, Rhode Island, in a small courtroom where justice meets mercy, people still talk about the day Judge Frank Caprio made everyone cry, including himself, because he chose to see a desperate mother instead of just another criminal. That's the kind of justice that changes lives. That's the kind of mercy that restores faith in humanity. That's the story I'll tell for the rest of my life because it reminds me that sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is simply choose kindness when the world expects us to choose judgment. And on that Tuesday morning in March, in a courtroom full of tears and hope, Judge Frank Caprio showed us all exactly what that looks like.